What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and it's time for yet another Mosh Pit Reviews, where I take a listen to some of the up-and-coming hard rock and heavy metal albums coming out in the calendar year of 2018. Basically doing this as like a limited series where it's basically depending on what I check out and see what happens. And for this week, I'm reviewing the new album from Ghost called PREQUELLE. I don't know how, there's so many different ways you could say it. I'll just call it PREQUELLE. But nonetheless, Ghost is a Swedish metal band that formed in the late 2000s and were at first signed to Metal Blade Records and put out their first record, Elizabeth, in 2010. Then in 2013, they put out their second album, Infestissimum, which features one of my favorite songs from the band, Secular Haze. And then they come back 2 years later in 2015 with their monumental Meliora album, even though I've only listened to 2 songs off of it. Basically, my experience with Ghost has sort of been a bit sketchy. Not because I didn't like the band. In fact, if you heard what I said about Secular Haze, you would know that from what I have heard, I've really enjoyed. It's just the thing is, the hype around this band just seemed to go a little bit over my head to the point where it was like, do I really want to tackle a whole album of theirs? Because I'm not entirely sure about. But I decided to give this album a listen. So this is my first full Ghost album that I heard. And, well, basically some of the big highlights and basically what encompasses the band's sound is that they're basically trying to sound like a 1970s metal band, similar to bands like Sabbath and Judas Priest, among many other of the contemporaries of the 1970s early metal movement. So they basically are trying to combine that with a little bit of 70s prog and add in a dash of psychedelic music and even a little bit of doom metal at times because of the slow the slow atmosphere, and the guitar tone sometimes kind of resembles a doom band. But nonetheless, with this album, it seems like some of the doom elements are kind of more or less removed from Ghost's sound, whereas when I heard the song Cirrus, I believe that's the song from Meliora, it still had a big doom metal dexterity to it, whereas pretty much 70% of the songs on this album have the doom element pretty much removed. And it's basically more of a traditional heavy metal, somewhat prog, somewhat psychedelic type of sound is what we're getting on this album, with even a little bit of influence of 70s pop rock kind of thrown into the mix there. So you start the album off with that song Ashes, which was that like little girl's ashes, ashes, we all fall down cliche, but then it gets heavy towards the end, and then it goes into the first single from the album, Rats. And this is the first time I heard this single was today on this album, and surprisingly it was a pretty damn good single. It was a really damn solid track. You know, it has pretty much, it encompasses a lot more of like that pop rock, traditional metal flavor to it, which is sort of similar to the second single from the album, Dance Macabre. Now, I gotta preface something here. When I saw the track list and I saw the 2 songs, Dance Macabre and Life Eternal, I thought to myself, are they going to cover the Decapitated and Mayhem songs? Because if they did, that would be interesting. Even though Dance Macabre from Decapitated is just an instrumental, like, embellishment build-up song going into their cover of Mandatory Suicide by Slayer. But I thought Life Eternal could have been a Mayhem cover, and I would have been curious to hear that, but we'll get to more about that song later. But Dance Macabre has a very similar kind of feeling to the song Rats. It has that pop rock, traditional metal flavor to it that I thought was pretty cool. But the track before Dance Macabre, which was Miasma, which is one of 2 instrumentals, or actually one of 3 instrumental songs, even though Ashes has those little girl parts, I would still kind of consider that more of an instrumental track. But Miasma was a well put together instrumental track that kind of carries a little bit of like a I don't want to say dark ambient, but just a more dark feeling to it. Like a much darker atmosphere around that song. But as we get later in the album with the second instrumental track, Helvetis Fonster, which was actually the longest song of the album at about 6 minutes. And it's, in my opinion, the best song on the album, and it's an instrumental because it starts out with this cinematic, dark funeral type of, not Dark Funeral the band, but like a funeral dirge mixed with like a cinematic movie soundtrack atmosphere to it, and I thought it worked out really well. And then the song carries on a more 70s prog rock influenced vibe going on throughout the whole song, and I thought that was a unique touch to perhaps the best song on the album. And then pretty much part 2 of that song was the closing track, Life Eternal, basically part 2 of that song, and I thought it was a fitting second part. Tobias Forge's voice, I feel, from what I've heard from him in the past, I feel like his range has definitely gotten a little bit more on this album, like he's doing more higher stuff, and also even showcased during the song Rats and the song Faith, a little bit of a black metal when he does that Rats. That kind of reminded me of like a black metal thing with the vocals there. So overall, with this album, top to bottom, it's a very easy album to listen to. It flows together beautifully. It's only about 41-42 minutes long, so it's not a very long album, only 10 songs. What more could you ask for? And the big sneak attack of this band and of this album is the fact of just how catchy some of the stuff is. And it just sounds like Ghost is playing a couple of styles that we've heard done in the past, prog rock and heavy metal from the 70s. It's like we're hearing those, but they make it sound fresh. Just like, say, when Dark Throne did Underground Resistance 5 years ago, they were playing a style that we've heard before, but they made it sound fresh. And then Power Trip with Nightmare Logic playing that more crossover thrash style and making it sound fresh, like as if that genre was just created in 2017. So Ghost is in that pantheon of bands who've come out in this decade or have put out records in this decade that have a sound of the old school but making it sound fresh, and I do respect that from Ghost. Overall, I would probably give this album an 87 out of 100. It's not a perfect album by any stretch of the means. There are a couple of songs on here, particularly the songs Witch Image and See the Light. Not quite as memorable as pretty much the majority of the album. Those were the 2 weaker tracks in my opinion, but it doesn't take away from the fact this is still a hell of an album, and you should definitely check it out. If you like Ghost, you'll definitely dig this album. But for me, not quite metal album of the year. To me right now, that still goes to At the Gates. But nonetheless, thank you guys for watching this episode of the Mosh Pit Reviews. I don't know what album I might tackle next. It could be the new Cataclysm album, could be Immortal, could be Obscura. I have no fucking idea. But anyways, thank you for watching. Peace out, and I will see you soon.